911, what's your emergency?
We're taking on water fast.
The rudder's gone. Something's out there, circling us.
Can you identify the threat? Is it another vessel?
It's not random. It's targeting us. Please, we need help now.
An Orca rammed a 58-foot vessel 3 times before dragging it under. What began as a dream, Voyage ended in nautical horror witnessed by the world. If this story shocks you, subscribe for more tragic truths, like this video, and tell us how close is too close when facing the wild. Captain Ron Barrett was not your average whale-watching guide. With a graying beard and sun-weathered skin, he carried the quiet authority of someone who had lived most of his adult life at sea. A retired marine biologist, Barrett had relocated to the Azores in 2017, drawn by the deep blue Atlantic and its thriving population of orcas. But Barrett wasn't there just to observe, he was there to connect. "There's one I've followed for years," he told local reporters in a 2022 interview. "I call her Luna. She's different." Barrett believed Luna had a special intelligence, a personality. He claimed to have first encountered her during a research expedition off Madeira years before and insisted their paths had crossed multiple times since. Over time, that belief became obsession. His private journals, later recovered by authorities, were filled with sonar patterns, call sequences, and notations about Luna's reactions. He began experimenting with acoustic mimicry clicks and whistles through a submerged speaker and claimed Luna had begun to respond. "She knew me. I swear she did," he said in an archive podcast. His YouTube channel Deep Speak Expeditions gained a modest following, largely due to videos showing Luna surfacing near the hull of his vessel after he whistled. In one, he stood at the bow, eyes closed, emitting a long, wavering note. Seconds later, a dorsal fin broke the surface just yards away. Comments flooded in, calling it a miracle of interspecies trust. Critics, however, were less convinced. Some called it confirmation bias, others manipulation through repeated conditioning and food rewards. Barrett dismissed them all. "I never feed her. I speak. She answers." He styled himself as a translator of sorts, a bridge between man and beast. His vessel, the Marcus Blake, was a 58-foot steel trawler he had refitted for marine ecotourism. Wide observation decks, reinforced hull, underwater microphones, and high-resolution cameras. It was his floating lab, his platform, and eventually his altar. Locals often saw him alone at sea, even without clients. "Sometimes I just go to be with her," he once told a visiting journalist. Colleagues in the field grew wary. "He stopped listening to reason," said Dr. Amara Keene, a former research partner. "He didn't study Luna anymore. He worshipped her." Over the years, Barrett's fascination morphed into a kind of reverence. He spoke at conferences about empathetic acoustics and non-verbal rapport. But beneath the romantic language was a dangerous premise that love or belief could tame nature, that trust could override instinct, and that a predator, if called often enough, would choose not to bite. Between 2020 and 2024, something began shifting in the cold waters off the Iberian Peninsula, a phenomenon that sent waves of unease through the maritime world. Orcas, once viewed as elusive yet majestic cohabitants of the Atlantic, were increasingly engaging with vessels in ways that were hard to ignore and even harder to explain. Rudders were being snapped clean off. Sailboats found themselves immobilized after sustained impacts from beneath. Crews described eerie moments when pods circled their craft, striking again and again with uncanny coordination. By 2023, over 500 such encounters had been logged up from just a handful 3 years earlier. Marine biologist Dr. Elena Duarte stated bluntly in a BBC interview, "Orcas are testing, learning. This is not random. Theories abounded." One popular hypothesis suggested a trauma response in Orca matriarch, likely wounded by a rudder in a prior incident, teaching younger members to disable boats as a learned behavior. Another posited it was all just play, misunderstood by humans as aggression. Others, more controversial, pointed to revenge, a cultural adaptation among orcas treating vessels as threats. The scientific community remained divided, but one thing was certain: the behavior was spreading. Maps began circulating in sailing forums, tracking black zones where orca interactions had become almost inevitable. Insurance companies flagged certain routes as high risk, but Captain Ron Barrett remained unfazed. "They're curious, not killers," he told a Portuguese journalist in 2024, standing atop the deck of the Marcus Blake. "They just want to know who's out there." That optimism, or denial, baffled his peers. Former deckhand Leo Mendez recalled, "We begged him to stop going out. He wouldn't listen. Said Luna would never hurt him." Emails from concerned colleagues, some bordering on frantic, were later recovered from Barrett's inbox. They warned of new attacks, altered patterns, the increasing boldness of the Iberian pods. But to Barrett, each warning was simply another misunderstanding of what he believed to be a sacred bond. In his mind, Luna was above the fray, detached from whatever cultural aggression the rest of the pod was exhibiting. "She's not like them," he once wrote in a blog post. "She's listening." But Luna wasn't alone. No orca ever is. The signs, in retrospect, were glaring. Hull impacts captured on GoPro footage. Changes in Luna's swimming patterns, more direct, less playful. Moments when she approached but didn't surface. Yet Barrett continued to lead his tours, continued to whistle into the sea. And with every outing, the chances grew that Lunior, something swimming beside her, would not be so easily understood. "He didn't want to see it," said Dr. Keene, shaking her head. "He was in love with a version of nature that never existed." On the morning of July 18, 2025, the Marcus Blake eased out of the harbor at Horta under a pale Atlantic sun. The sea was calm, a flat mirror stretching endlessly toward the horizon. On board were 3 crew members, including Captain Ron Barrett and 2 guests, a German wildlife photographer and his daughter, both eager to capture the famed Azorian orcas on film. Spirits were high as the vessel motored into deeper water, hydrophones deployed, sonar gently pulsing. The guests marveled at the quiet. "It's like another world," the daughter reportedly said, pointing at the dark shapes flickering on the screen. Then came the clicks, distant, rhythmic, unmistakable. Orcas, Luna's pod. The energy on board shifted from relaxed anticipation to reverent thrill. Cameras were raised, binoculars passed around. Barrett leaned over the rail, whistling softly through cupped hands. Moments later, a black dorsal fin sliced the surface a few hundred yards out, then another. One of the crew, a local named Tiago, muttered something in Portuguese, glancing nervously at the approaching shadows. But Barrett smiled. "She remembers me," he said, barely audible, his eyes locked on the water. Without warning, he cut the engines. The boat slowed to a drift. "We're too close," Tiago warned, but was ignored. The orcas closed in. One began circling the bow. Another brushed the port side, leaving a foamy trail. GoPro footage, later retrieved from a guest's memory card, showed a mix of laughter and awe until the first jolt, a dull thud. Then another. The camera shakes. A fin large, muscular, unmistakable slams into the stern. "Did you see that?" the daughter asks, her voice suddenly tense. Barrett fumbles with the controls. "Let's pull back," Tiago urges, now clearly alarmed. But the engine doesn't respond. A mechanical whine, then silence. Barrett flips switches, checks dials. Nothing. "It's just interference," he mutters, though even he doesn't sound convinced. The mood shifts. The guests retreat to the cabin. The crew scrambles to deploy a secondary radio. Outside, the circling continues, more deliberate now, less curious. The hydrophones record a flurry of acoustic signals, overlapping, sharp. A sudden crack splits the air. The rudder has been hit again. The boat lurches. Tiago grabs a flare gun. Barrett waves him off. "They're just confused," he insists, almost pleading with the sea itself. A third strike rocks the hull. Water sprays over the deck. Someone finally gets through on the emergency channel. The message is brief, panicked. Engine failure, orcas attacking, coordinates. The transmission cuts. Moments later, the Marcus Blake begins to list slightly to port. The sky remains cloudless, the ocean indifferent. Below the surface, Lunior, whatever part of her Barrett believed he knew, was no longer alone. What happened next defied even the darkest expectations of marine behavior. As the crew scrambled for control, the orcas appeared to move with eerie precision, no longer individuals but a coordinated force. First, 3 of them targeted the rudder again, snapping what remained of the steering column with a sharp upward thrust. Then came the second wave. 2 larger orcas rammed the portside hull in quick succession, triggering a metallic groan that echoed across the deck. Inside the vessel, alarms began to blare. The photographer's daughter, filming from the aft, captured a moment now burned into maritime tragedy. Lorian Orca, positioning itself directly beneath the stern, then using its immense strength to lift the vessel upward at an angle before letting it drop. The jolt threw crew members off their feet. "They're trying to capsize us!" The girl screamed, the audio distorted by panic and crashing waves. As the hull slammed back onto the surface, a violent crack opened just above the waterline, and seawater poured into the engine room. Barrett, drenched and shaking, yelled for the bilge pumps, but they failed. Instant flooded. Tiago attempted to fire a flare, but the launcher misfired. The guests donned life vests in chaos, shouting over each other, some slipping on the drenched deck. Barrett reached for the emergency beacon just as a final thunderous impact came from starboard. An Orca, traveling at full speed, slammed into the vessel broadside. The boat tipped violently, then listed further, water gushing through every breach. Gear slid across the deck. The daughter was swept into the water. Her father dove in after her. Barrett clung to the rail, still calling Luna's name, even as the boat groaned beneath him. "They're not like this," he was heard mumbling. But they were. Mayday calls were sent, but garbled. The ship rolled onto its side, then sank bow first into the deep. The final seconds were captured only in fragments, gasping voices, bubbles rising, a last image of the Marcus Blake vanishing into a vortex of foam. Hours later, aerial search footage revealed a wide debris field, life jackets, shattered wood, floating cameras, and a cooler bobbing silently in the waves. The survivor, a crewman named Elias, was found clinging to that cooler, half-conscious, sunburnt, and mumbling incoherently about black eyes in the water. No one else was ever recovered. The sea had closed over them, and the orcas were gone. In the days that followed the sinking of the Marcus Blake, the Azorian Coast Guard initiated a full-scale investigation, joined swiftly by international maritime authorities and independent marine researchers. The loss of life, the vessel, and the disturbing nature of the attack prompted immediate scrutiny. Wreckage was scarce, and the absence of additional survivors only deepened the mystery. Elias, the lone crew member rescued, was airlifted to São Miguel Hospital and debriefed under sedation. His words, recorded and later leaked, were stark. "They weren't playing, they wanted us gone." That statement ignited a firestorm in the scientific community. For some, it was seen as anthropomorphizing a human projection onto complex but instinct-driven behavior. For others, it echoed mounting concerns about a shift in orca interactions that had gone ignored for too long. The central question emerged: had Captain Barrett, through years of unauthorized proximity and acoustic engagement, inadvertently conditioned the pod to see his vessel not as neutral, but as responsive, a manipulable object? Was Luna, his beloved Orca, part of the attack? With no GPS tag on her, no certainty existed. The most chilling discovery came from the vessel's salvaged black box buoy. In the final minute of usable audio, Barrett can be heard whispering, "She's testing me. This is new." Moments later, the sound of impact drowns out all speech. Experts were brought in from across the globe. Dr. Helena Morales, an Orca cognition researcher, reviewed the hydrophone data and concluded that multiple coordinated clicks, echolocations, and pod vocalizations indicate deliberate targeting, not random behavior. Maritime insurers declined all claims, citing willful negligence of documented risk zones, repeated close-range interactions, and refusal to follow established Orca distance guidelines. The guests' families, devastated, were left without compensation. The vessel itself was never recovered. What remained was footage, some from the Marcus Blake, some from previous outings now repurposed into marine safety training videos. One clip, in particular, showed Luna circling the boat as Barrett knelt at the rail, whispering to her, eyes closed. It plays now in seminars with the caption, "Misplaced faith is not a safety strategy." The Marcus Blake became more than a shipwreck, it became a case study. At international marine behavior symposiums, the incident is labeled under a new term, conditioned escalation. The idea that repeated, well-intentioned exposure can lead intelligent animals to adapt in unpredictable and potentially fatal ways. Coast Guard Captain Luis Ferreira, who led the recovery effort, summed it up during a press conference. This was not a random act. It was a culmination. A mistake played out over years, in slow motion, until the ocean decided it had seen enough. The ocean, they would say later, had answered back. In the aftermath of the Marcus Blake disaster, the academic and maritime safety communities turned to behavioral ecology for answers, specifically the growing body of research surrounding orca intelligence, cultural transmission, and learned behaviors. Orcas are not just apex predators. They are among the most cognitively advanced non-human species, known to share complex hunting techniques across generations. Within the Iberian pods, evidence had long pointed to the development of a specialized rudder attack strategy, surgically precise strikes that immobilize a vessel without immediate destruction. This behavior was first observed in 2020 and rapidly replicated among juveniles, indicating not randomness, but a form of tactical inheritance. "They aren't malicious," said Dr. Helena Morales during a joint briefing with the European Cetacean Society. "They're problem solvers. They learn what works, and they teach it." The idea that such behaviors could escalate in sophistication, especially in response to repeated stimuli like propeller sounds or acoustic mimicry, was already gaining traction. But Barrett's case introduced something more chilling. The possibility that sustained, personalized interaction could lead to a breakdown in perceived boundaries. Barrett had spent years projecting human motives, trust, friendship, even affection onto Luna. He built a belief system around her uniqueness, never realizing that from the orca's perspective, he was just another variable in an increasingly manipulable environment. The danger wasn't just the orca, Dr. Morales explained. It was miscalibrated intimation emotional equation where only one side believed in mutual understanding. Luna, if she was involved at all, may not have recognized the boundary between man and machine, play and aggression. Barrett's repeated acoustic cues, his unbroken proximity, and his refusal to treat the pod as truly wild may have eroded their caution over time. This is the essence of what researchers now call the habituation paradox. The more familiar a wild animal becomes with human presence, the more unpredictable and potentially lethal its responses can become. What begins as cautious observation often ends in blurred behavioral lines. "He thought she was learning to trust," said Dr. Alan Kruger, a marine mammal ethologist. "But she was learning something else entirely, how we respond when we flinch, where we're vulnerable." The tragedy, experts agree, was not born from a single strike or even a coordinated assault, but from years of reinforced patterns, unexamined assumptions, and unreciprocated beliefs. Barrett's love for Luna was real. But in nature, love is not a shield. It is not understood. Love is not protection, Dr. Morales concluded. Not when the rules are biological. What we call a relationship, the ocean may interpret as stimulus and reaction. And sometimes when a line is crossed too many times, the wild doesn't push back, it simply removes the line altogether. On a lecture slide now shown in naval safety trainings across the EU, one quote appears under a photo of Luna near the hull of the Marcus Blake. "What begins as a relationship ends as a reprogramming. The sea has no memory, and neither do the creatures who inhabit its depths." In the weeks that followed the sinking of the Marcus Blake, while human investigators combed through data, grief, and fragments of wreckage, the orcas simply moved on. The same pod believed to be responsible was sighted off the Galician coast days, later surfacing, diving, and resuming their silent, coordinated ballet beneath the waves as though nothing had happened. There were no signs of aggression, no guilt, no remorse, because nature does not grieve human tragedy. It adapts, survives, and continues. The world, however, could not forget. A bronze plaque now sits near the harbor in Horta, engraved with the names of the victims, and a quote from Barrett's own journal. "To love something wild is to risk being misunderstood. Tourists leave flowers there, and occasionally someone whistles into the surf no one answers." Yet beyond the sentiment, something more concrete began to shift. Legislators in Portugal and Spain began drafting proposals to restrict close proximity ecotourism with orcas, citing the Marcus Blake incident as a turning point. New maritime safety protocols now include specific clauses on behavioral escalation zones, and updated risk briefings are required for any vessels navigating known orca corridors off the Iberian coast. Captain Luis Ferreira of the Azorian Coast Guard addressed the public in a somber press event. "This isn't about punishment, it's about recalibration. About understanding that our presence out there has consequences." The Marcus Blake became a symbol etched into PowerPoint slides and safety manuals, dissected in marine biology courses and Coast Guard academies. Its final voyage serves as a case study, not of recklessness, but of tragic conviction. A man who believed too deeply in the idea that love could bridge the space between species. A man who gave his trust to the sea, expecting something in return. The final footage ever captured of Lunior, a member of her pod, shows her breaching once, silently, at dusk. There is no music, no commentary, just the heavy splash and the hiss of water rejoining itself, then darkness. Final narration. He thought she was his friend, but nature doesn't do friendship. The emotional fallout rippled through communities of wildlife lovers, documentary filmmakers, and animal behaviorists. Was Barrett a fool? A martyr? Or merely a reflection of a larger human arrogance? The belief that nature can be befriended if approached with enough warmth, enough patience, enough belief? Experts now speak of boundaries with renewed urgency. Not walls of fear, but lines of respect. Lines that once crossed, no matter how lovingly, cannot be undone. On screen, over faded footage of the Marcus Blake vanishing beneath the waves, the final words appear: "Admire them from afar. That's the only safe distance." And then, one last question, left hanging like the echo of a sonar pulse. What happens when the ocean answers back and it remembers your name?